Welcome back to week 7 of game development in the Forge. Continuing with our examination of game mechanics, this week we'll be identifying objects and actions. The time and space that we went over last week would undoubtedly be pretty uninteresting if there weren't things to occupy and perform actions within that space and time. Characters, technologies, props, tokens, cards, dice, virtually anything that can be seen or manipulated could be considered an object. But here's the thing about objects. They wouldn't be very interesting either without some clearly identifiable attributes. Talking about objects and attributes in a game has a lot of parallels to object-oriented programming if you know anything about that. At the highest level, just understand that objects have attributes that make it possible to identify those objects. Let's take Mario for example. Now as soon as I say Mario, before even showing you a picture of him, you most likely know who I'm talking about, since this is a game dev class. But why is that? What are the attributes about Mario that make him, him? He's short, he's a plumber, he's got beef with Bowser. We could actually probably generate a decently long list of attributes for Mario. Perhaps a hint that he's a slightly more complex character than we've thought all these years. In any case, as we list our attributes, it's also important to categorize these attributes as either static or dynamic. Static attributes stay the same. They're a core piece of an object's being. Essential to the character of Mario is that he's a plumber. If we ever saw a short, mustachioed man in overalls and a red cap, but then learned that he couldn't travel through pipes and wasn't a plumber, we'd know immediately that that wasn't the real Mario. Dynamic attributes are attributes that have the potential to change and be in different states. For example, in level 1 of World 1 in Super Mario World, you start off as a tiny little baby Mario. Your size is in the baby state. However, upon the discovery of a sweet and delicious red-capped mushroom, you undergo an immediate transformation into a state of adulthood, and now you're a force to be reckoned with. Watch out, Goombas. Your state may also be changed by a fire flower or a star, giving you other temporary attributes. Because these can change fluidly during gameplay, they are considered dynamic attributes. Now let's consider something slightly more abstract, a game of checkers. Now checkers have a relatively small list of attributes. All that's needed to know about them is their color and whether they've been kinged or not. A checker's color is a static attribute. It will never change. Its status of kinged or not is a dynamic attribute because if you get your checker all the way to the other side of the board, that checker changes and has some new powers to play with. Now states have another mechanic attached to them that's a very important consideration for gameplay. In a game, the state of any given object or objects can either be public, where every player knows everything, or secret, where only certain players know about certain states. For example, in chess, both players know about the state of the board and the pieces at all times. There's nothing hidden. But take a game like poker, for example. In poker, players are dealt cards and keep the value of those cards hidden. You may know the state of your hand, but the entire game of poker is based on making your best guess at what the state of other players' hands are in relation to yours. In tabletop games, it's generally only possible for states to be public or hidden among players. And there are some exceptions, for example cooperative board games, where all players play against the board. In video games, however, the presence of a third party is much more prevalent. The game itself. You may be playing a game online with another friend, making quick judgments about the state of the game to gain some advantage. However, both you and your friend have a limited scope in comparison to the algorithms and programming in the game itself. Ever notice when bosses get harder the further into a fight you get? Or do you ever get mad when you can't pass a certain part of the game and exclaim, "The game is cheating"? Well, you aren't too far off. The game is a program. It knows everything about itself and what goes on inside of it. And you can bet that there are plenty of secrets kept from the player to make the experience more interesting, albeit frustrating sometimes. Some important considerations when it comes to secrets. What is known by the game only? What is known by all the players? What is known by some or only one player? And would changing who knows what improve my game? Changing states and revealing secrets will never happen without performing some kind of action, which is the next mechanic we'll dive into. If objects are the nouns of a game, then actions are unquestionably the verbs. Actions can be thought of in two levels of scope, basic and strategic. Basic actions are laid out in the rules of a game. In chess, for example, the legal moves for each piece are spelled out and understood by players before the play begins. Strategic actions run quite a bit deeper than basic ones. They have relevance to the game as a whole, rather than a single turn. Let's stay with the chess example. I can move my knight out of the back row early on in the game, That basic action is scoped to the time and space it takes to take my turn. However, that move will affect how I move the rest of my pieces for the rest of the game. It is part of the grander strategy. This idea of grander strategy is evidence of what is called emergent gameplay. Emergence is a term used to describe something that grows out of something else. Perhaps the most palpable example of strong emergent gameplay is in the world of sports, and esports for that matter. Every game has a basic set of rules and actions that make it, well, a game. However, if engineered well, those rules and actions will allow players to elevate that game into an art form. You may have heard these words said about any of the great athletes in the last century, that they played the game in such a way that it could never be played the same again. This is because that player elevated their game to the level of art and created something new within the boundaries of the original product. Emergent gameplay is certainly a widely agreed upon benchmark for a good game. In order to make your game ripe for emergent gameplay, consider the following. Add more actions. Strategy occurs when actions interact with each other. The more that the player has to choose from, the deeper the strategy becomes. Have actions affect multiple objects. Just as strategy emerges from actions interacting with each other, so too does it emerge as actions affect objects within the game. Make goals that can be achieved in more than one way. The more choice a player has, the more they can mix and match, bend and twist to get new strategies out of a game. And lastly, more objects equals more strategy. In a nutshell, the more choice you offer a player, the deeper the potential strategy and emergent gameplay will be. But be careful! Remember that a game first and foremost must have players and an audience. Not everyone feels that thinking about the complex nature of war from the perspective of a general is a fun or even worthwhile way to pass the time. Match your level of complexity and strategy to your target audience. We're getting closer and closer to understanding all the basic building blocks of a game, and soon you'll be chomping at the bit to put all this newfound knowledge to use. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you next time in the Forge.